Today, the 9th of March, 2026. And yesterday I did not do a video because it was Sunday. And I do like to take that day for meditation, for prayer, to take my dogs out for a longer walk, etc., etc. And not so much videos, but I did share quite a lot over the weekend on my various social media, especially Instagram. And I just wanted to go over a few things that are still up again just in the last 18 hours, and that applies to some things that I've been saying over the last few years and what's finally becoming a little bit more mainstream. So this is regarding fake certifications, fake degrees, fake licenses, etc., that people are paying for, and where these people are given they're getting access to these industries within Canada, and it's causing a lot of harm, and it's not helping us economically at all, despite what leftists still think. Anyway, so breaking: police in India have arrested 11 individuals accused of distributing more than 100,000 fake university degrees in fields such as medicine, nursing, and engineering. So I'm going to reiterate, this stuff does happen. The organ harvesting, etc., in China does happen. And it's nowhere, that's just like a touch. And in Canada, we need to have people that further investigate this.
And then they...
Okay, and so this is for Dream Rare, from the Dream Rare podcast. I really like a lot of his work. And Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I guess she just went on his podcast recently, and this was a really interesting conversation regarding how there are certain groups, lobbyist groups, and people of influence who target people and classify them as anti-Semites if they question Netanyahu.
For example, labeled me anti-Semitic. And I was like, hold on, I don't hate anybody. I'm not anti-Semitic. Why would I be? I don't hate anybody for their identity. That doesn't matter to me. But that was the label that they instantly put on me. I mean, it happened. I wasn't even in Washington a few weeks, and that was the label they put on me. Well, I think everyone knows today that is the label that they try to destroy you with.
I think the reason that they do that is because they know who is and isn't controlled.
Yeah. So people who are more libertarian are being classified as Christian nationalists or nationalists, etc. And the irony in that is there are people that are part of like the radical Zionist groups who are absolutely, this has nothing to do with religion. They are absolutely nationalists and committing and supporting genocides and war crimes and crimes against humanity, especially children, and damaging infrastructure and settling in areas they have no business, and also targeting Christians. And you could be against terrorism, and you could be against things like Sharia law, especially being codified into law, especially where it oppresses women and children. Absolutely, which I have been saying for years. And so I do think, again, with immigration, we need to be a lot smarter in how we're doing it, especially in the last 5 years. This is not a net positive gain for Canada at all, even economically, but in so many other ways as well. And so for people that keep on saying that, that's incorrect. And in so many different ways, especially again in the last few years, where people are grifting the asylum refugee claims status, even criminals and people that are, again, not contributing to Canadian society at all, including economically, and they are abusing our systems in place, and it's at the taxpayer expense. And so for people that are saying that our quality of lives are being improved and our economy is being improved, you have not been paying attention to GDP and how we're like the worst out of like the G7 countries, and it's been deplorable now for again like a decade, and how the cost of living has gotten incredibly expensive, where our children will not be able to afford a home until they're in their 40s now. And like even a couple of years ago, the average age of a woman giving birth for the first time in Canada, 30 years old. In the US, it's 27, and it's also increasing. But again, this is also directly correlated to, again, the economy. where men and women need to be represented within the workforce. Again, based on merit, absolutely not based on woke DEI, critical race criteria, bullshit propaganda narratives. And again, I'm on a tangent, but yeah, for me wanting that, I get called a racist, a bigot, discriminating, et cetera, et cetera. No, no. And if you want a safe place for people to actually legitimately flee from oppression and war, et cetera, then you need to maintain the countries that are the safety nets and safety zones, and they cannot be adopting the same practices and principles and societal norms that are happening in the countries where people are mass immigrating and not assimilating or adopting Canadian cultures and values. And we're over exhausting our energy grid, and I keep on saying that as well. Like especially since we're like the green energy scam that we've been pushing now for years, it's unsustainable, especially because of the climate that we're operating in, and we can't sustain it. So there will be more blackouts, more rolling blackouts, more controlled ones, and more. And so we're not thinking about the people that would be most impacted by even, say, for example, not having the ability to have AC or heating because of the the requirement for the electricity. And if it's out, okay, this more profoundly impacts people obviously that are on life support, okay, and they need backup systems in place, but also the elderly who are more impacted by high heat, extreme temperatures, and children. And anyway, there's even more, but I'll let them talk.
So for instance, if you're not taking a lot of money from lobbyists, if you're not taking money from APAC, you know, the word, they're trying to look for an angle to say you're an anti-Semite to try to smear you. And as Charlie Kirk would always call it, moral blackmail. Like, you know, you're trying to like question my character in order to push me in a direction.
I got texts about you, Megan.
100%.
Saying, why is Megan like doing the bidding of Hamas? I was like, what are you talking about? Megan's the best. This is what they don't understand. You and I, Megan, and Tucker is in the same category, and they've tried to go after Tucker.
Yeah.
Is that and the more you attack our moral character, the more we're going to double down in a direction, because 100%. Screw you, I don't do it that way, okay? And I
was just talking to a few people because there's synagogues getting targeted in Canada. Just like in the last several years, there have been Christian churches that have been targeted, burned, et cetera, et cetera. And it's frustrating because this is in response to people becoming more radicalized, whether it be and doing these, you know, to fit your own agenda, or being like legitimately targeted because of your religion or race, et cetera. And we're seeing that as well, like the response in Palestine, where there are people that have become radicalized and funded also by Canadian organizations as well, which I don't agree with, but becoming radicalized because for many years there has been war crimes and crimes against humanity that have been committed against people. And again, when you keep doing that and there's zero accountability and it doesn't stop and it gets worse, you will get people that become more extreme in societies, especially again when there's zero accountability. And we're seeing that in Canada as well, more and more, that people are getting frustrated because there's no accountability within our government, and there's no one that is being paid to do their jobs that are actually doing like the jobs on behalf of Canada and Canadians. And I'll get into anarcho dictatorships and totalitarian regimes in a second, because I still want to play this out. But and just the harm that it causes when we're not even able to say the truth without getting labeled and targeted and attacked, and in many cases even arrested or charged and put in jail, like we're seeing in Canada more and more.
And I will say this, the behavior by a lot, both privately and publicly, are pushing people like you and me away. The way you are treating me is so repulsive. I have text messages, Megan, calling me an anti-Semite. I don't stop being friends with people just because people morally blackmail me. I don't do that, and you shouldn't either.
To get you to do certain things. For me, it was 2019. I just realized they were passing these anti-Semitism hate speech rules, like the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism. And I read it similar to you. Like I wasn't really thinking of race and religion much or who was who. I was just more like, this is crazy. It talks about Jesus. Now it's policing biblical speech. It says you can't talk about who controls media companies or who has dual loyalty. Like, I just thought it was a crazy infringement on the First Amendment. And it's
like Mark Miller and others within the Canadian, within cabinet. I'm saying like cabinet, there's so many people that need to get fired and charged and jailed and replaced.
As soon as I started talking about it in Republican media and circles,
and it shouldn't be up to the people. It should be up to the government. Like, again, this is like when people talk about revolutions and all this stuff. Like again, like this needs to be peaceful. And you think that in 2026, like our government would kind of clue in to what they're supposed to do for the people in order to prevent societal collapse.
where, you know, I got invited to the White House in 2018. And then all of a sudden everyone's like, dude, my friend told me not to book you for this media thing. I was like, why? They're saying you're far right and anti-Semitic. And I was like, dude, I feel, especially at the time, I wasn't even that conservative. Now I think I am. I'm older. I was in my 20s, but I was like, why am I far right? Like, I feel like I'm the nicest one out of everybody. And they're like, oh, it's because you said the thing about Israel. I was like, I didn't say anything about Israel. I talked about the speech laws. So they knew that I wasn't going to completely play ball. I think they probably just knew that you were not for sale on that topic specifically. So that's the angle to try to morally blackmail you into probably voting for foreign aid and speech rules and stuff.
Yep. Well, they try to destroy you. And so the pressure they put on you as a member of Congress, they have terrible articles written about you. They plant those stories. They plant the stories in the media. The media goes along with it. And then they labeled me anti-Semitic. And I was like, hold on, I don't hate anybody. I'm not anti-Semitic.
So this is what I was talking about. This is Canada. So a video is going viral showing a white man in Toronto being accosted and fined by two female immigrant police officers over a fare he had already paid, while a black man smokes crack in the back of the bus.
I just feel like I'm being singled out here. You're not doing anything about the guy in the back that hasn't provided proof of payment. I didn't even notice you.
Okay. When I was walking towards you, that was when you got up and tapped your card.
You think
and
it's
you
funny
clearly
when you single
said to
people
me,
out?
And you clearly
What are you
said to
laughing
me,
about? That's not professional.
You forget to boarded at Joe's, and I said you did not board
I
at
did pay
Joe's.
my fare.
And that is the reason
Upon
I
I was
you that
inspected,
ticket.
you were provided proof of payment. Now you're trying to push a false narrative and
Did I
single
give
me
you
out.
failure to provide proof of payment? I give you failure to comply with posted.
Yeah, and you're not unreasonable.
Okay.
As soon as I get on, you just single me out for no reason.
No, we checked.
Nothing reasonable
we
about you.
Everyone.
Yes, and then you're
just trying to create a scene.
No,
we tapped,
no,
we
you're
checked
creating
everyone.
a scene by pushing a
All right,
false
let's go.
narrative. All right,
Thank
see you
you.
in court.
Yeah.
Be reasonable. They're holding a streetcar just for you. You're smoking fucking crack and meth back here.
Literally.
What the fuck?
This is Toronto. And this is happening all over Canada in major cities. It's crazy. It's crazy. And so the conservative alternative, this is who posted it. Textbook anarcho tyranny. Law-abiding citizens get harassed while criminals run free. It's a precursor to societal collapse. It's not sustainable. Even when I was on Pat King on his podcast last year, like I was saying, like, we need to address this because these anarcho-terrorists they're literally there. And then again, it's the coin flip, the Stanford prison experiments. Like, look at that again. And how the only thing that the independent variable, because again, like I forget what his name was, Zimbardo, who was the head of the research experiment, who in his mind like became the warden of the prison experiment, and he created a simulation. Long story longer, and his independent variable, like he didn't even realize that it was the coin flip, right? So whether you became a prison guard or a prisoner was based on that, and then they separated people and chose who they were going to have, you know, selected for the experiments. And I highly encourage people to take a look at that, and how it very clearly shows again that things have to be, and it's impossible. It's not impossible, but it's almost impossible. Universe 25, the same thing. When you introduce trauma into an environment, if it's not corrected, especially in the beginning, then this is something that could get out of control. And even within the first 24 hours, the Stanford prison experiment, it was already going way too far. And it took a woman, and I believe it was either someone he was in a relationship with or he was close to anyways. I think they were in a relationship together, but she had visited him after a couple of days, and she had to point out what he was doing, you know, was inhumane practice. And then he was able to think about it, and within, I think, 5 days, it was shut down, or shortly thereafter. And these are other examples I've talked about in the past, where, like, for people to say that like women should not be teachers or educators, or, could not be like leaders or prophets or judges, etc. Well, you are completely going, especially if you're a Christian, you're completely going against the Bible teachings, the teachings of Moses, of Jesus, of others, and women that have been literally named in the Bible in multiple occasions, and about submitting to God, both being applied to both men and women, and submitting to God. And I'll get into that afterwards, because again, I get on these tangents. Okay, so anarcho-tyranny is a concept where the state is argued to be more interested in controlling citizens so that they do not oppose the managerial class, the government. That's tyranny. Rather than controlling real criminals causing anarchy. Okay, so we're getting people that should be deported. They're here illegally, hundreds of thousands, if not millions. All right, and they're taking taxpayers' dollars that should be going towards our most vulnerable peoples and people that have paid into the system for decades, and their families as well. And we're not doing that. And there's more break-ins, there's more grooming gangs, there's more human trafficking. There's more foreign international crime rings in Canada, operating in Canada. And we're not focusing on that. We're focusing on a teacher who, used the wrong pronouns, I guess, or was talking about something controversial that's part of the woke DEI, like going against that narrative, again, going against the government tyranny. And he was fined $750,000. And again, it's being appealed. But, people like Tamara Leash, Chris Barber, Pat King, Jeremy McKesson getting jail time, peaceful people that, again, were resisting the anarcho tyranny, okay, that was literally being pushed upon us by our government, thanks to Justin Trudeau and Chrystia Freeland and Marco Mendicino and Bill Blair and you clowns. Anyway, and jail and house arrest and longest trials in Canadian history regarding mischief. But we have rapists and murderers, literal rapists and murderers that did not get jail, and they're not even Canadian, but they're in Canada. This is where we're at, and our government, they need to be the one that steps up in 2026 with all the information we have, with all the education, with all the experiments that have been done throughout the friggin' world. Wake the frig up and use your brains. Yeah. So laws are argued to be enforced only selectively, and there is a two-tier justice system, selectively depending on what is perceived to be beneficial for the ruling elite. So even with the ostrich farm and that murder, the horrendous murder that happened under Mark Carney, okay, this like, and the RCMP slaughtering these freaking innocent animals, when there were people within the US that were willing to take them on for research, for scientific research, justifiably, and the testing not being done, all of this stuff, and not looking at natural immunity and what they were actually used for, and the fact that they were not being used for human consumption, et cetera, et cetera. And a family farm, another business destroyed. But again, it wasn't a leftist organization. So this was one thing I didn't really agree with, because you look at the Stanford experiment, those were mine. Okay, so a communist system can be recognized by the fact that it spares the criminals and criminalizes the political opponent. And that is from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. I say it wrong all the time, but anyway, it's very interesting. And this is Canada. And this is even Dark Garbaggio that's saying it, like checking in on Canada. Okay, this is where I'm going to reiterate. Like I am not a proponent or a fan of how certain countries are utilizing Sharia law to oppress women and children within society. With not only like what they have to wear as coverings, but the fact that they're seen as property. They can't own property. They can't teach. They can't drive. They can't be educated. There's so many rules and stuff like that. And so this is like, again, people that like have codified Sharia law into their legal systems and very, very incompatible with Christian values and culture. And so I could be, relieved for a country that they don't have these disgusting men that have oppressed them for like almost 50 years, like have them like removed from positions of power. And I'm hoping again, though, that Iranians wake up and they get a grip of their country, of their own country. And I mean that respectfully, because again, Canada has to do the same thing, and get into those positions, like the political positions in so many different organizations, military, law enforcement, political, educators, et cetera, you have to get control of your country, and it has to be sooner, vice later, for everyone's own benefit and profit. And yeah, I know it's a little bit more difficult there because you've been under oppression now for a lot longer, and there have been a lot of people that were protesting that have been slaughtered by their government. Absolutely disgusting. I think the number is like over 40,000 people slaughtered, and there are also children that are being that are casualties of the airstrikes. And even as of March 2nd, this doesn't include the 40 female volleyball players and the at least 167 elementary school children that died on the 28th of February. But now there's even more. Again, it's not, and these are targeted attacks, all of the Middle East. It's not just Iran. And again, these are people that are pushing for biblical prophecies to be fulfilled. It's absolutely ridiculous. And again, these people are being brainwashed and indoctrinated into pushing this by people that do not have anyone's best interest at heart. And so, the Greater Israel Project.
Iran today accused the U.S. of hitting a desalination plant in Iran. And they said that
So a desalination plant in Iran was struck. And so obviously this is going to impact a lot of people within that area that were using that infrastructure.
I opened the door to other strikes on infrastructure, non-military.
Allow us to also open the door to other strikes against them. Look,
You respond to that allegation. Did the U.S. hit the desalination?
they are among the most evil people ever on earth. They cut babies' heads off. They chop women in half. What they did, take a look at October 7th. Take a look at what they've done over the last 47 years. So I know nothing about a desalination plant other than to say if they're complaining about a desalination plant, we complain about the fact that they shouldn't be chopping babies' heads off, okay?
Chopping babies' heads off. Who's believing this? All of a sudden, Iran are chopping babies' heads off. They cut women in half. Yeah? This is atrocity propaganda. They constantly use it to show the enemy as barbaric, non-human, to justify mass murdering them. Israelis did it to Palestinians. They said they chopped 40 babies' heads off. They had whole TV crews. It was completely false. It was meant.
Ben Shapiro, who I called out literally, I am still saying this to this day, one of the first people that was able to throw what he posted on social media, threw it into AI. And it was AI generated. Him saying about the burned babies, the charred babies, that was AI. And I think it was like dogs or puppies that were in like some kind of a dog bed or whatever that was generated into, again, making it look like there was charred dead babies being burned alive. I'm not saying what happened wasn't disgusting. And by the way, I've done multiple videos, even the BB files on Jolt. I highly recommend people take a look at that. But it shows like what was done, but also who enabled and supported and funded and knew about it and wanted it to happen, and had people where there was a stand down for hours. There was no response. The location of the venue was moved shortly beforehand, closer to the border. Like, there's just so many things that people need to be aware of. Netanyahu under investigation, criminal investigation, still is. Okay. And so like while he's at war, again, he is not getting properly criminally investigated, and he should be in jail. And Ben Gvir and Smotrich talking about, again, wiping people out, like about actual genocides and supporting and enabling it. And so there's so many lies that are being told. And even with Russia, Ukraine, like even the spokeswoman that I've talked about multiple times that was fired because of these fake allegations of rapes that was like within days of the war, and then it goes to Kiev and stuff like that. All propaganda. It was all lies. But again, it wins over the hearts and minds of men and women, and then their natural response to that is to want to stop that, right? And it's just so disgusting that these are the tactics that are being used, and Trump should know better, okay, than to do that. And but again, it's just like the same old stuff being recycled. Ukraine, Russia, I already talked about that. 9/11. They even had this the daughter of some kind of royalty or some person of significance from the Middle East lied to Congress under oath, again, about babies being killed in incubators, etc. It was a lie. Netanyahu lied to Congress in 2002 about weapons of mass destruction in Iraq and more, and about so much more lies. And so for people to think that we're going to, I'm going to reiterate, there's horrific things that are happening all over the world. And why now do they care so much when, again, this is something that's been happening in the Middle East now for literally for a long time, but now you care about it. What about Africa? What like the Christian slaughters that are happening in regions there, or the civil wars, or the human trafficking, or the drug trafficking that even the UN is involved in? Like, spare me with you saying like target like isolating one specific country when you know damn well that there's a lot of stuff even happening in the US. Like, are we going to forget about the satanic, cannibal, pedophile, like devil worshippers? Are we gonna like you're gonna keep on Pam Bondi and Lutnick as part of your staff, Trump? With everything they've been covering up regarding the Epstein files and lying about the relationships with them and how close they were? And possible cover-ups of 9/11 and stuff like that. Again, Americans and Canadians who have died, not only on American soil, but also in the Middle East over lies.
No. And now they're doing the same thing about Iran. They cut women in half, yeah? Iranians are running around the place chopping women in half, cutting babies' heads off. They're making me look like a liberal. Me. For having to defend them, because I don't think we should be blowing up innocent people. I don't believe the average Iranian is a monster, are the most evil people in the world. I know if we asked the average person 2 years ago, should we invade Iran and change the regime? They'd have said no. But like that, with a bit of news, a bit of propaganda, there'll be people dancing at the thought of it, celebrating it, cheering it on. They were always our enemies. They were always the most evil people in the world. Only that is the first question the reporter asks is, did the US hit a desalination plant in Iran? That is drinking water for civilians. They're cutting off the water supply for civilians in Iran. It's not military targets, it's not nuclear weapons, it's not ballistic missiles, it's water. It also means all desalination plants in the Middle East are now fair game. Anyone that is aligned to the US, Iran's probably going to hit their desalination plants. That puts all the Gulf countries at risk of losing their water supply. That happens.
And then you're going to get the people that are part of like the aid programs, et cetera, et cetera. They're going to have like the water supplies that there are people within the US that have shares and stocks in these companies, right? And they've been waiting for crisis and natural and man-made disasters to happen. And again, because it's a grift. And so even that head of the, whatever his name is, Dana White or whatever, I forget what his name, but I called this out a few years ago. I got to look at my videos, but it's like, yeah, you're pushing for this and it comes across as a good thing, but until you know what it's going to be used for and how people are going to be exploited for, again, to make profit and gains for these companies.
Going to be total chaos.
Iran today accused.
Very seldom have I ever watched a show where I have sat up in my chair and gone, yes, this is what's going on. It was made in 2021, so I've had a little bit of context. It's long, so it won't be recommended to new audience. So I hope you watch it and share it because it does a very excellent job of explaining how our world has been controlled, who's doing it, and why they're doing it. And I hope you enjoy.
The rich would much rather we didn't think at all, and certainly not about the wise words of the columnist Claire Rayner, who once famously said that the only reason we now have to live under kings and queens and presidents is that in past ages their ancestors were the best thieves. In the Middle Ages, when the king was feeling greedy and wanted to pay for a new mistress or grand new palace, he simply sent out his robber barons to steal half the herd of every local farmer. And if they complained, the robber barons would say the king needed to feed the army, or some similar excuse. That is how it was done then. But today, the ruling class face a different problem. We now live in an industrial age, and as George Orwell explains in his novel 1984, if the machine age was directed solely with the intention of making the common people physically comfortable, in a mega-productive, computer-controlled epoch, we could soon all live like millionaires. But think what this would mean. If we're all millionaires, we all fly first class. So the king and the queen and the president have to wait in a queue with everyone else. And do you honestly believe the Queen of England would wait in a queue behind you?
Do you think Patty Hajdu, Chrystia Freeland, Justin Trudeau, Mark Carney, you think they would wait in a queue?
If we're all millionaires, we all play golf. The king and the president can't get on the course. and there's no room on their exclusive beach. Orwell himself would have said the most important single sentence in 1984 was this one: "If it once became general, wealth would confer no distinction." Our lords and masters are not going to wait in queues with the rest of us. So the special problem which fat cats face today is how to keep the wheels of industry turning, because, as Orwell explains, the oligarchs have to make use of the masses without significantly raising the general standard of living. This is a more sophisticated age, so the robber barons need a more sophisticated means of stealing most of the wealth and of keeping most of the common people in poverty. What the rich face today is a situation in which the common people spend most of their lives on a 9-to-5 treadmill. They make things in factories, they grow things and harvest them, they teach in the schools, nurse in the hospitals, and as a result of their daily labours, a huge mountain of money is produced. Now the rulers have a problem. How can they keep the ordinary people hard at work so they're too exhausted at the end of every day to think about whether this is a fair system? The solution, as Sam Giancana explained, is to invent a foreign enemy, a boogeyman, who wants to conquer the whole world. This becomes a perfect excuse to make people pay for a sophisticated array of increasingly expensive weapons, which are made by companies which the fat cats themselves own. And in one neat little scam, the modern robber baron has a means of stealing most of the wealth produced by Western society while leaving the common people with just enough crumbs to keep them going. Every year, America's oligarchs take $3 trillion out of the United States economy.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
This is how the rich have rigged the system, so that it benefits them at the expense of everyone else all the time. But in order to keep this fraud going, the public must always be convinced of the need for military expenditure. This is where all the phony terrorism comes in. And if we want to find out who is behind this ongoing hoax, we only have to look at Securicom, the company in charge of World Trade Center security, who removed all guards and sniffer dogs from the buildings on September 10th, so that the charges which brought down the towers in controlled explosions could be planted. If we now ask, who is the chief of Securicom, who do we find? Marvin P. Bush, brother of George W. Bush, son of the man who orchestrated the plot to assassinate President Kennedy, and grandson of the man who made the family fortune from Auschwitz slave labor. The Bush family and their rich friends have been behind all of it. During his time as president, George W. Bush connived with Tony Blair to introduce a deliberate policy of allowing unbalanced and aggressive Muslims to flood into Western countries. They did this in the hope that they would commit atrocities in their adopted countries, and they were actually delighted.
And Pierre Elliott Trudeau responsible for that in the 70s. Late 70s, early 80s.
When the Washington, D.C. sniper and the Fort Hood shootings made headlines because they knew such events would make it easier for the public to swallow the idea that 9/11 was simply more typical Islamic terrorism. The truth is that Islam is simply being used like a pawn on a chessboard in a game the fat cats have been playing since World War I. 70 years ago, they gave us what they called their Hitler Project. 50 years ago, it was the JFK Assassination Project. Today, we're having to suffer the War on Terror Project. And when this current lunacy is over, they'll have another excuse ready to create yet another phony war and yet another patsy. If George Orwell was still alive today, and he was asked to comment upon all the significant political events of the last decade, it's quite likely he would simply restate the Orwellian definition of totalitarianism, to wit, a society living by and for continuous warfare, in which the ruling caste have ceased to have any real function but succeed in clinging to power through force and fraud, and then ask whether this sounds like the world we live in. Because it ought to be obvious by now that our seemingly endless economic recessions are being deliberately orchestrated. In today's world, the commodities markets are arranged in such a way that the price of virtually everything, particularly food, hardly ever changes. So how then can it be that the price of oil increased tenfold in the last decade? Economists are now
We were saying this in 2021. Price of living, like food, like everything has gone up.
tacitly agreeing that this was due to financialization, which is just a fancy way of saying rich creeps like the Bush family and their merchant banking friends used their trillionaire fortunes to rig the market. Why did they do this? Because great entrepreneurs like Stelios, with their budget air travel, had managed to break the cartel of the major airlines. Ordinary working families had begun living a jet-set lifestyle. The ruling elite of the entire world was simply terrified, because a jet-set lifestyle is supposed to be the exclusive preserve of the rich. What would happen to their social status if the whole world were part of the jet set? So the rich arranged for the credit crunch, and now working families who used to fly 10 times a year can't even afford to use their car. What George Orwell understood better than anyone is that every age is basically the same. It is always a story in which a small elite group of greedy people cling to unjust power and privileges by practicing an ongoing deception upon their followers. Caesar did it with bread and circuses in the Roman arena. George Bush did it with false flag terrorism on 9/11. British newspapers have told their readers that the Queen of England...
And then just like the Reichstag fire in, I believe it was 1933. But anyways, under Adolf Hitler, and rights and liberties, freedoms taken away from the people within days of that. And this was something that was a false flag that was created by the government in order to do that. The Hegelian dialectic. Same thing happened with 9/11, and the immediate introduction on the shelves of the Patriot Act, and so many freedoms and rights taken away from us, and again to a lot of people willingly, and we've been paying for this, like with so many taxes to support the Patriot Act now since 2001, and it's a friggin', and I know people don't like it because it's overused, but it's a friggin' grift for these subhuman fat cats that they're describing here.
Is only the 10th richest person in the UK with a fortune of 3 billion. But experts who have calculated her real wealth reckon that her ownership of 1/6 of all the land on planet Earth puts her true fortune nearer to 22 trillion. And they also estimate the true wealth of the Queen's merchant bankers, the Rothschilds, the people who started all of this greed by lending money to the Harrimans and the Morgans, to be at least 100 trillion. So finally, we have to ask, what is to be done about all this? For in the case of America, it is obvious that in order to honor the memory of President Kennedy, Americans are now duty-bound to finish his work by finally ending the worldwide tyranny of the CIA. The time has come for ordinary Americans to ask their strong men in uniform just exactly what and who they think they are defending. And they better not take too long about it. Having established Islam in the West in order to provide us with an enemy, the elite have recently started on the second phase of their master plan, which is to wipe out anyone who is sick or disabled. In Britain, this has been manifest in the Atos scandal, which has stopped all welfare payments to people with terminal illnesses and allowed invalids,
oh yeah, and we have made,
who in some cases have no limbs, to starve to death. The extermination of anyone considered feeble-minded or infirm was exactly how the Nazi regime began. And now they've started doing it again.
And people are talking about bringing back mental institutions, and I don't disagree with that, by the way. I think, but again, this needs to be something that is done in a controlled, focused way. All right, and there will be people that will be classified, by the way, as mentally insane. If you're gay, if you're lesbian, if you identify as part of the LGBTQ plus IAXYZ community, like that under Sharia law, punishable by death. But if they're not going to do that, then you're going to have to give money, and or again, you're going to be institutionalized or killed. And don't think this has not happened, even in recent history. Yeah,
What most amazes me in all of this is the naivety of the good people in the truth movement, who go on and on and on saying they want an independent inquiry. The Bush family and their rich friends are not going to investigate themselves. And there isn't any authority on earth above that of the ruling class, so it's never going to happen.
And the people they choose to investigate, again, they're going to be people that are part of it. Just like we're seeing with the ethics committees and stuff like that that we have in Canada, our checks and balances, government-funded people, look what they're doing.
These people have got the police and the judges and the justice system completely under their control. Yep. The Queen of England cannot be prosecuted for anything, not even genocide, in a Crown Court, because the Crown Courts are hers. She owns British justice. The only way to change our corrupt system is through revolution. Everyone has to sign up to the Revolution Now website. And then the people have to march on Washington, just as they did for CIA agent Barack Obama's inauguration. Only this time, they need to kick him and every other crooked politician out and take power genuinely for the people's sake.
This is the lazy way that completely takes away accountability from people within government that are supposed to do that. And that's the frustrating thing. So if there's a revolution, this has to be government-led, organized, and executed. So military, law enforcement, judges, etc., step the fuck up. Because this is not helping you, and it's definitely not going to be helping your family. All right, so that's it for that. But again, what I'm going to be talking about regarding my conversations with ChatGPT, they do kind of relate. And so I looked at a bunch of things. I threw some stuff onto a Word document that I like the most out of these conversations, but I figured it's probably just best to go through it. And I was looking into the Kuldi people, very friggin' interesting. And so that was what I was also doing yesterday. And like the different calendar systems they had, how they practiced Christianity, and very much in line with, again, I guess the Kuldi would be what we'd call present-day Presbyterians that didn't believe that the ruler of the church or the state had authority over the individual. Like we have our own individual relationship with God and obedience and service to God and his lessons, and not to people, including judgment. They prayed for long periods of time and were educators as well. Artists. They preserved a lot of written materials from even throughout Jesus's time. Again, even though this was like a few hundred years after, but following the teachings of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the Gospels, and we're getting away from like the Roman, like the New Age versions of Christianity. And again, obviously there was other religions as well. And again, they were subscribing more to like live like Jesus did. And anyways, the Kuldi, they had their own calendar system, which looked at the solar and lunar calendar systems, which I totally agree with as well. I do the same thing. And they had an 84-year cycle. And it became controversial as Rome and much of Western Christianity standardized around newer systems. The older insular method looked increasingly like a sign of independence or nonconformity. This is one reason the issue became so charged at the Synod of Whitby, 664. The dispute was not over whether Easter mattered. Again, the conversation regarding why they didn't want to convert or be part of the Roman Catholic Church was because even of the different calendar systems and because of when they celebrated Easter and how. And so obviously something that was like of significance for them. And so just to give some context, so the dispute was not over whether Easter mattered, but over who had the right reckoning, and underneath that, whose ecclesiastical authority would prevail, like so religious authority would prevail. This is so ridiculous because I've been having conversations about this being an electromagnetic cosmos. Sometimes, again, Grap will throw in like the Ionian insular ion insular. Anyway, okay, so the Kuldi side was associated with the old and Irish, the old 84-year Latercus is what you'd call it. Scottish as well, because this, again, in those times, they were people living in close proximity that shared the same religious teachings and cultural teachings and things like that. The Roman side championed the Dionysian Alexandrian reckoning. Whitby ended with a decision in favor of Roman practice. So was this specifically Culdi? Not originally in the strictest sense. The 84-year cycle belonged more broadly to insular Christianity, especially older Irish and British usage. So I guess that was the old calendar system that we were going off of before the Culdi even. Since the Celli Dei, Culdis emerged later as reformed communities within the wider tradition. They inherited the world shaped by those older practices. So if someone says the Culdis use the 84-year cycle, that can be true in a broad inherited traditional sense, but historically the cycle itself is older and wider than the Culdis as a movement. Totally agree. In the Middle Ages, Computus, so why it matters beyond Easter. So Computus was one of the most advanced sciences in Christian Europe. It forced scholars to work with lunar cycles, solar cycles, weekdays, equinoxes, numerical harmonization. So the 84-year cycle mattered not only because it set Easter, but because it reflects an entire intellectual culture of sacred timekeeping. Irish computistical scholarship is now seen as highly important for understanding early medieval chronology and learning. So the old Irish 84-year Easter cycle was an early medieval computistical system used to determine the date of Easter by coordinating lunar and solar reckoning in a repeating 84-year table. It became a major marker of ecclesiastical identity from the Culdi because it differed from the later Roman Alexandrian methods and stood at the center of the wider Easter controversy over authority, conformity, and sacred time. I asked a little bit more of a breakdown, so. Okay, so the lost Irish 84-year Easter table rediscovered. So this is what you can look at if you want more information. This is one of the key studies on the Irish 84-year cycle and explains its structural lunar limits and paschal limits. It states that the Irish table used an 84-year Easter cycle with lunar limits 1420 and paschal limits 26 March through to 23 April, meaning the paschal, the full moon period after the spring equinox would be the following Sunday after that is when they would celebrate Easter. Okay, then you got Daniel McCarthy. Trinity Publications on the Paschal Controversy, useful for the wider historical context in Ireland and Britain. Okay, so the important periods of the 84-year cycle, the solar year under the Julian calendar, the weekday repetition cycle of 28 years, the lunar month, paschal moon, the spring equinox, and the repeating 84-year table itself. Okay, so Easter was determined by the Sunday falling within a defined lunar range after the equinox. One summary of the practice says it used an 84-year cycle, lunar. Okay, so not really saying much. So zodiac signs not technically important, but I would argue they are because Jesus and the 12 apostles and even the Culdi, when they did go to like these varying island places or remote locations, they would travel like there would be a leader and then 12 disciples or apostles that would be with them in these communities. And even the empress, female from that time of significance, even in the painting of her, actually with Mary, she has 13 people in each of her eyes when you look closely in. Very elaborate and detailed, and people are saying like, how the heck could human hands actually even paint that? Okay, so the solar anchor, the spring equinox, when the sun travels through Aries, we have equal amount of day and night, which is coming up. Lunar anchor, the paschal full moon, or the relevant ecclesiastical lunar date. It's usually the full moon in Libra. So like the full moon after or around the spring equinox. Again, the sign is like, again, the opposite side of the calendar, Libra being where the sun enters into Libra. That's where we have the fall equinox. The 84-year cycle belongs to Christian Computus, not a later popular Celtic zodiac, sure. So here's a diagram. I didn't really like it, but So 1 year, 1 solar year passes. 7 days, weekdays keep shifting. Lunar months, moon dates drift against solar dates. 84 years, and table pattern repeats for Easter calculations. Solar anchor, spring equinox. Lunar anchor, paschal moon. Weekday anchor, Sunday. So the earlier church, and even in the Bible, actually, there is something too against celebrating the Sabbath or God's day of rest, either on the evening of Saturday or on Sunday, but largely how it's where like the first day of the week is Sunday. Not Monday. Okay. So again, just a little bit redundant. Like using the sun and the moon as part of their system and not just some like random day that falls on the same like day every year. All right, so this is where I'm getting into a completely different topic. And it's because again, I'm looking at a lot more debates and even clips on social media and discussions, conversations I'm having with people on the left and right regarding women's roles within society, and topics about trad wives, about the right to vote. I'm seeing this a lot about like people talking about removing the 19th Amendment. And again, these are big accounts that are talking about this, right? So like the Nick Fuentes, Andrew Wilson types, and there's not a lot of representation, I think, or strong arguments to debate these people. Again, these are expert debaters, and they have been for many years. And so I can understand that it can be intimidating, but I do feel like the people that they're getting on to debate, I don't see it as helping the narrative. Sorry, I'm getting distracted because there's conversations going on outside here, and how people are misinterpreting or cherry picking passages within the Bible, and not looking at the passages that come just before or just after, or looking at the proper interpretation of these passages, cherry picking in order to subject women to being again assumed as and people like again using the Bible as a weapon against women, to say that women are subservient to men, we're lesser than men, and not equal basically in the eyes of God to men, and or should be relegated to just being barefoot and pregnant, giving birth in the home, or just again the KKK stuff, which how it was interpreted in Germany and stuff like that was like it's kitchen church kids, and I'm saying that is my argument is that Moses, that Jesus, and how people in the past. They were feminists, and they were actually feminists in a time where it was absolutely not the norm. It was absolutely a radical concept to provide women with equal rights, with property rights, with the right, with influence within society, with being these major leaders, which I've talked about before, and not like relegated to again just being barefoot and pregnant, and not being literate or educated or having any say or authority. So I'm rambling, but so in my conversation after this, I'm talking about women are being called to submit to their husbands, because that's something that's always brought up, like I've said, and it's in Ephesians. And so the passage is Ephesians 5:21-33. And it is one of the most selectively quoted and most abused texts in Christian history. The patriarchal misrepresentation usually does three things. Starts at verse 22, which I hear this all the friggin' time when people want to push that, instead of verse 21. Treats submit as if it means inferior, voiceless, owned, or passive, ignoring that the heavier command in the passage is actually directed at the husband. The full logic of the passage. The section really begins here. Ephesians 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. 5:21. Submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Point blank. Everything that follows is part of that broader command of mutual submission under Christ. Then Paul says, Ephesians 5:22-24. So let's bring it out there. Wives, submit yourselves to your own husbands as you do to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Then comes the part patriarchs often minimize, Ephesians 5:25-28. Again, they'll cherry pick, and it's infuriating sometimes. So husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and the people and gave himself up for her. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. All right? And later after that, Ephesians 5:33. Each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. So I've talked about love and respect a lot. But again, one is not subordinate to the other. One is not lesser than the other. All equal under the eyes of God. Why this was misrepresented. The patriarchal reading often turns the passage into husband equals ruler, wife equals subordinate, obedience equals silence, headship equals control. But that is not what the passage actually says. And again, it's up for interpretation. So verse 21 changes the whole meaning. Paul begins with submit to one another. So the household code is framed by mutuality, not unilateral domination. Patriarchal teaching often deletes that frame and starts at verse 22, so the text sounds one-sided. Submit, by the way, submit does not mean be less human. Biblical submission does not mean inferiority, lack of intelligence, lack of rights, lack of moral agency, being property. It means yielding oneself in ordered love and trust within a relationship and abiding by things like the 10 Commandments, these codes, these universal codes throughout Christianity, these lessons that are taught. Okay, thou shalt not lie, cheat, steal. What we see a lot of men doing, respectfully speaking, people say men, women as well, yes, but again, in my experiences, and again, it's anecdotal, but again, like men not being obedient to God and not following the 10 Commandments. All right, with like the Tinder and the cheating and the lying and the stealing and the drugs and the this and the that. Yeah. So it means yielding, and that's not being, that's not showing love to your girlfriend or your wife as God loves his church. So it means yielding oneself in ordered love and trust within a relationship. The text never says wives are spiritually inferior, wives are less rational, wives cannot lead, wives are slaves. In fact, elsewhere, Paul says in Galatians 3:28, there is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. So Ephesians cannot honestly be read as erasing women's equal worth. And I'm going to reiterate too, like there's the obvious physical strength, and this is where God also puts again more of an onus on men being the physically stronger sex. Again, this has nothing to do with intellect or anything like that, but again, to have more care upon the more vulnerable. Weaker in physical strength does not mean again a superior gender. The husband's command is far harder. The wife is told to submit. The husband is told to die. Not literally in every marriage, but in principle. Paul does not tell husbands, rule your wives, control your wives, discipline your wives, make your wives obey. He tells them, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So when you're doing the things like the porn and the OnlyFans and the cheating and the lying and the stealing and the all of that stuff within the relationship, we don't have to give you love and respect if you are doing that. In fact, God would tell us again to leave that situation. Okay, so a command for self-sacrifice, protection. So yes, the command for men: self-sacrifice, protection, service, cleansing, nourishment, cherishing. That is the opposite of Roman patriarchy. Why this was radical in its time. In the Romans world, The paterfamilias held enormous legal and social power. A husband, father, could dominate the household. Women were often treated as extensions of male authority. The moral burden was heavily placed on wives, children, and slaves, not on the male head. Paul does something disruptive. He speaks directly to wives as moral agents. He speaks directly to husbands as morally accountable. He limits male power by making Christ, not the husband, the model. He transforms hardship from domination into sacrificial responsibilities. In patriarchy, the husband says, "You exist for me." In Ephesians, the husband is told, "You must give yourself up for her." That is not Roman domination. That is reworking of household structures under Christ. What head means here? This is debated, but there are two major readings. The patriarchal reading, head equals boss, ruler, authority over. Alternative Christian reading, head, source, conventional representative, responsible protector, one who bears burden. Even if head includes authority, the authority is immediately redefined by Christ's examples. Christ's hardship is not tyranny. It is self-giving, healing, cleansing, protection, love unto death. Again, not lying, not cheating, not stealing. The addictions, all this stuff. So any husband using Ephesians to demand domination is already violating the passage. How patriarchy used this text against women. Historically, this passage was often weaponized to deny women education, trap women in abuse, silence women's speech, enforce total male control, make women feel guilty for resisting mistreatment. That reading is false because it ignores the structure of the passage. A husband cannot claim, "You must submit to me," while ignoring, "I must love you as Christ loved the church." If he is abusive, manipulative, degrading, coercive, sexually exploitative, or controlling, he is not obeying Ephesians 5. He's violating it. Why Jesus cuts against patriarchal misuse. Jesus consistently treated women as disciples, witnesses, thinkers, moral agents, participants in truth. Examples: Mary of Bethany, Luke 10:39 through 42. She sits at Jesus' feet as a learner, and Jesus defends her. And again, it was about Martha as well, being at home, bearing children, and Jesus defending her in her pursuit, saying that she's absolutely not lesser than because of her wanting to seek knowledge and be taught by him at his feet. Samaritan women, again, because I'm going to reiterate, throughout history, 100% of women, unfortunately, and again, I wish I did have a family and children. I wanted that. But again, like I chose men that were not very freaking Christian in practice. Anyway, but again, it's not to put all the blame on that, to be clear. Not 100% of the female population will ever have children, and the same thing applies for men. That does not make them lesser than, but there still needs to be, again, if you're going to go off the teachings of the Christian Bible, like ways that you can be fruitful and provide blessings to others and provide services in meaningful ways, right? So even like growing gardens or raising animals, again, like and fruit and vegetables, etc., to give to your community, giving to donations, volunteering. There's so many things that people can do if they don't have that again the children, where they can still be of service, if that makes any sense. And that applies for men as well. And a lot of the issues that people are having with fertility, especially in the last decade or so, is because, again, 40 to 50% now fertility issues are in men for people that are trying to procreate. So again, this cannot be thrown at women. I'm going to reiterate, as only an us problem to fix. And again, economically, societally, there's morally, there's so many things that need to be fixed in order to make it where the family structure is, again, up front and center within society. The Samaritan woman, John 4. John has a long theological conversation with that woman, and makes her a messenger to her town. And that was like the longest theological conversation he had with people, was with a Samaritan woman. Woman accused of adultery, John 8. Jesus refuses the hypocritical male power structure that wanted to destroy her. I'll elaborate that more, but it's judge not lest you be judged is the example of that. And where men in positions of power were utilizing it, that we were again doing the same things, lying, cheating, stealing, and they wanted to punish a woman for a crime that they've committed, and they want, again, it was an exploitation of power that Jesus, again, he was against. The same thing with people that are in positions of power within Canadian and American governments, that the people that are actually corrupted criminals, and they're giving sentences to people and judging people, again, that have not even done a touch of what these people have freaking done. But anyway, Mary Magdalene, John 20, she is entrusted with announcing the resurrection, the first witness. So if someone interprets Ephesians in a way that reduces women to voiceless inferiors, that interpretation conflicts with the way Jesus himself treated women. And Moses, if you're building the argument that the biblical trajectory was restraining patriarchy rather than creating it, Moses is relevant because the Torah includes protections that were already more limiting of male arbitrariness than many surrounding systems. Miriam, Deborah, Huldah, the daughters of Zelophehad, I've already talked about them. I'll get more into them as well in a bit. Show that Hebrew tradition itself did not erase female dignity or agency. Okay, so women live inside patriarchal cultures, and God repeatedly acts in ways that limit, confront, and disrupt those structures. The best way to explain Ephesians 5 in one sentence: Ephesians 5 was not originally written to authorize male domination, but to radically restrain it by forcing the husband to model his role on the self-sacrificial love of Christ within a framework of mutual submission under God. Why this text still troubles people? Because it is still not full modern egalitarian language. It does preserve differentiated roles. Totally agree with that. And again, it's going to be the majority, but not 100% of a population. Ordered household language, asymmetrical phrasing. So people disagree about whether it is complementary but equal, culturally conditioned, proto-egalitarian, still patriarchal but softened. But what is clear is that it does not teach that women are lesser beings, property, or targets for male control. That was a later patriarchal misuse. Okay, so Ephesians 5 has often been misrepresented by patriarchal interpretations, which begin at verse 22, wives submit, and ignore verses 21, which frames the entire passage, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. In context, Paul does not grant husbands unchecked authority. Rather, he places the heavier moral burden on them, commending husbands to love their wives, as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. This transforms household order from domination into sacrificial responsibility. In the Roman patriarchal world, where the male had traditionally exercised legal and social powers over wives, children, and slaves, Paul's instruction functioned as a restraint on male power, not a blank check for it. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for Timothy, Corinthians, etc. Okay. The most important thing, there is no biblical passage that says husbands may dominate wives. There are, however, multiple passages that place husbands under mutual submission, sexual mutuality, sacrificial love, restraint, and accountability. Does God tell men to submit to their wives? The Bible does not usually phrase it as husbands submit to your wives in one single isolated line, but it does teach it in substance in several ways. Mutual submission, Ephesians 5:21, I already talked about that. Okay, 1 Corinthians 7:3-4. This is one of the strongest anti-patriarchal passages in the New Testament. The husband should fulfill his marital duty to his wife, and likewise the wife to her husband. The wife does not have authority over her own body, but yields it to her husband. In the same way, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but yields it to his wife. This is radical. In the ancient world, men were assumed to have sexual rights over women. Paul says not only does the wife yield to the husband, but the husband yields to the wife. This is mutual embodied submission. Patriarchy usually quotes wives submit, but ignores the husband does not have authority over his own body. So it means the husband is not sovereign over himself in marriage. He is bound in reciprocal obligation. Reciprocal. Sacrificial love as self-emptying submission, Ephesians 5:25. Husbands, love your wives just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. This is not a soft command. It is a command to surrender, sacrifice, protect, nurse, cherish, die to selfishness. If Christ is the model, then husband's headship is not domination. It is cross-shaped self-giving, submitting one's ego, submitting one's desires, submitting power to love, submitting pride to service. So even where the word submit is not repeated directly to husbands in the same sentence, the actual command is even more costly. Honor and understanding, 1 Peter 3:7. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker vessel, physically weaker, not intellectually, and as heirs with you in the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Heirs with you. So they're saying, oh, the weaker vessel, you're physically weaker than me. What's your point? That gives you more responsibility over your power. So heirs with you, though. So that means that women are co-heirs, not lesser souls. And men are warned, mistreat your wife, dishonor her, and your prayers are hindered. That is not patriarchy. That is divine accountability placed on men. Does God also mention submitting to man? Yes, but in different categories, and this is where context matters. The Bible teaches several kinds of submission. Submission to one another, Ephesians 5:21, submit to one another. Submission to governing authorities, Romans 13:1. Let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. Okay, and again, Jesus and the Bible also teaches about false prophets, false teachers, corrupted leaders and teachers, etc. But they're also, again, like the teachings of leaders that are honorable, that are noble, etc. To absolutely, again, to listen to them, right? And I hope that makes sense to people. It's when the lessons are corrupted and people are teaching heresy and non-truths where we have the issues. So 1 Peter 2:13, submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every human authority. Okay, so this is not absolute because Acts 5:29 says we must obey God rather than men. So again, it depends on the character of the person, what they're doing, what they're saying. Okay, so we must obey God rather than men. Acts 5:29. So submission to authority is real but limited, never absolute, and never above God. Younger to elder, church order. There are also passages about younger people submitting to elders. Again, this is like a respect thing as well. Believers respecting leaders, ordered conduct in church. But again, these are functional and ethical, not claims that one class of human beings is ontologically superior. This is an important one as well. 1 Timothy 2, the women must be silent, not teach passage. And this one, again, one of the most weaponized texts. I will agree with that. And this is from 1 Timothy 2, 11, 12. And again, this is not from Jesus. Okay, so let women learn in quietness and full submission. Do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. She must be quiet. Patriarchal reading. Women can never teach men. Women are permanently barred from authority. Women are spiritually secondary. But there are major problems with that reading. Let women learn is a self-radical. In the ancient world, many women were not formally taught theology. Paul begins by saying, let a woman learn. In a period of time where, again, most people were illiterate. Again, this is huge. Even hundreds of years after that. Okay, so that is not nothing. It affirms women as theological students. The setting appears local and corrective. And this is where there's a point here. So many scholars argue this is dealing with a specific Ephesian problem, false teaching, disorder, untrained teachers, possibly women influenced by error. So again, we're pointing this out, and there's points about this in George Orwell as well, about these women that were being utilized to be spies and deceivers and et cetera, and taken away, again, the true sanctity of womanhood and our purpose, through God, again, being governed by the government, Big Brother. And again, these false teachings. So I can understand, like, even now we're seeing like these friggin' Karens, but they're men and women, but mostly women, that are part of these like protests, these friggin' like movements that are just like so anti-societal, and like these educators that are unhinged, like Neely Keeplin Murr, like head of the education system, completely unhinged, probably still wearing a mask in an office just to prove a point. And again, people that are pushing the woke DEI critical race theory bullshit and pushing it into our societies, and massive unchecked immigration with incompatible cultures and religions, etc. People that hate God, hate Christianity, don't believe in God, that are, again, influencing the masses. So this is not entirely incorrect. So in other words, Paul may be restricting a particular abusive or ignorant teaching situation, not issuing a universal ban on female teaching for all churches for all time. It conflicts with women elsewhere teaching or leading. If 1 Timothy 2 means women can never teach men, and again, this is not something that Moses or Jesus said, then how do we explain Priscilla helping teach Apollos, Acts 18:26, Phoebe as deacon, Romans 16:1, Junia among the apostles, Romans 16:7, Deborah judging Israel, Huldah instructing the king's officials. I mean, we got so many more, Miriam and Jael and countless others. So Mary. So a blanket patriarchal reading creates contradictions across scripture. Assume authority is disputed. Some scholars argue the Greek verb here suggests not rightful teaching office in general, but something more like domineer, usurp, seize authority wrongly. They would fit the context much better than no woman may ever exercise theological authority. It's just ridiculous. Okay, so 1 Corinthians 14, women should keep silent in the churches. 1 Corinthians 14, 34 through 35, literally says it. Women should remain silent in the churches. Okay, this is often used as the final hammer against women, but again, context matters. Same letter, earlier, women are praying and prophesying. So 1 Corinthians 11:5, Paul explicitly refers to women, every woman who prays or prophesies. So clearly in the same letter, women are speaking, praying, prophesying publicly. So this means chapter 14 cannot mean women must never speak in church at all. The likely issue is disorder. That I'm not going to disagree with, and I can see it because we're seeing it now. 1 Corinthians 14 is about chaos, interruptions, disorderly worship, people talking over one another. So even that Trump influencer, female pastor or whatever, and like going into these like weird tongues and stuff like that during your sermons, and just like, I don't know. Yeah, so silence is not situational. Sorry, wrong. Silence is likely situational, not a universal ban on female speech, but a command against disruptive speech that is in that setting. Paul also tells tongue speakers to be silent in some conditions, prophets to be silent in some conditions. So silence in 1 Corinthians is not uniquely imposed on women as a permanent status. And yet throughout the Bible, again, there are again like heretics and people that are being condemned because of lies and deceit and things like that, power abuse. What the patriarchal reading does wrong. The abusive reading of these passages does several things. I wouldn't say it's abusive, but again, like these are targeted and weaponized passages that are utilized. I see all the friggin' time with these major podcasters and debaters. And again, it's just so, to me, like just disgusting, respectfully speaking, and it's such a misinterpretation of the Bible, especially when you look at societies when there's equal rights for women and children, etc., and we take more care for the protections of the most vulnerable. This is where societies have thrived the most, economically, spiritually, physically, you name it. And if you want examples of where women's rights and children's rights are restricted, you can look at so many different places in the world. Okay, it isolates the restrictive lines. So that's where it's dangerous. It quotes, wives submits, women be silent. I do not permit a woman, while ignoring, submit to one another. Husband does not have authority over his own body. Women praying and prophesying. Women teaching, prophesying, judging, and leading. It turns functional order into ontological inferiority. The Bible's instructions about order gets twisted into women are lesser beings. Women are less intelligent. Women are less spiritual. But scripture never says that. It ignores Jesus. Jesus consistently taught women, received women as disciples, defended women from male hypocrisy, entrusted women with truth-bearing roles. Any interpretation that makes women into voiceless inferiors is out of step with Christ. Jesus against the patriarchal world. You said Moses and Jesus were ultimate feminists. Again, I just threw that in there to see what ChatGPT would say. If by that you mean they were confronting male dominant systems and raising the dignity of women within harsh patriarchal cultures, then yes, that is a fair way to describe the trajectory. Jesus lived in a world shaped by Roman patriarchy, male household dominance, legal double standards, restricted female testimony, religious exclusion, and he repeatedly pushed against that. Examples: Mary of Bethany as disciple, the Samaritan woman as a theological interlocutor, women accused of adultery defended against male legal hypocrisy. Again, not about the immoral acts, but again about the legal hypocrisy by men. Mary Magdalene commissioned as resurrection witness, women as patrons in Luke 8. He was not preaching a modern political ideology called feminism, but he was radically affirming the dignity, agency, and spiritual seriousness of women in a culture that often denied them full standing. So, clean summary. The New Testament does not teach that women are inferior to men or that husbands may rule wives by coercion. Rather, it teaches a framework of mutual submission under Christ, in which wives are called to honor their husbands and husbands are called to a deeper self-sacrificial love that requires surrender of selfish power, bodily autonomy, and domination. Passages later used to subordinate women were often isolated from their context, stripped of mutuality, and weaponized by patriarchal cultures in ways that conflict with the larger biblical witness. Okay, so mutual submission, female authority, and the misuse of biblical texts against women. Okay, so let me see here if there's anything new. Okay, so still a little bit of redundancy. Mutual obligation. Husband yields to wife. Wife yields to husband. Yeah, if you want me to yield to you, you yield to me. Right? Anyways. And if you're going to lie, cheat, and steal, just like I've done, goodbye. It's hard. It sucks. Again, it makes the chances to have a freaking family impossible. But again, we need, like, God needs to be back in the schools and government. And the proper teachings. Okay, so men in scripture repeatedly submit to God through women's wisdom, prophecy, and authority. So Deborah, men submit to her public authority. In Judges 4:5, Deborah is not merely an advisor, she is the judge of Israel. Now Deborah, a prophetess, was judging Israel at the time. Men came to her for decisions, including Barak, who was the leader, receives military instruction from her. Her authority is public, judicial, and national. Huldah, king and priest, submit to her prophetic judgment. Again, I mentioned them before, but I'm going to unpack a little bit more of what they did for context, even though I did in my other video. In 2 Kings 22, when the book of the law is rediscovered, the officials go to Huldah. Hilkiah, the priest, went to speak to the prophet Huldah. The king's reform proceeds according to her interpretation. In practice, male political and priestly authority submits to female prophetic authority. Abigail, David submits to her correction. In 1 Samuel 25, Abigail stops David from committing bloodshed. After hearing her, David says, "Blessed be your discernment, who have kept me this day from blood guilt." David, the future king, submits to the moral wisdom of a woman and changes course. Again, like sometimes men can let ego or anger, etc., get in the way of making appropriate decisions. Sometimes it does. Okay, so Esther. A nation's fate turns on male power listening to a woman. The Persian king, under Esther's intervention, reverses a genocidal decree. Her courage and intelligence redirects imperial power. The daughters of Zelophehad. Moses submits to their legal case. In Numbers 27, 5 women, 5 sisters, challenge the inheritance structure, and God declares. The daughters of Zelophehad are right. Numbers 27:7. The law is adjusted. Male leadership yields to justice articulated by women. And again, this is property rights we're talking about, because their father didn't have any male heirs, and they're like he shouldn't just be able to, like, we should be able to have rights to this property. Priscilla, a learned man, is corrected by a woman. In Acts 18:26, Priscilla and Aquila explain doctrine more accurately to Apollos, a powerful preacher. The text does not treat this as scandalous, it treats it as Christian instruction. So the biblical pattern is clear. Men are not simply called to lead women. They're also called, when truth and justice require it, to listen to women, receive correction from women, and submit to God through women. Men submit to God first, and that submission limits all male power. The Bible consistently teaches that a man is not supreme, God is. Acts 5:29, we must obey God rather than men. Deuteronomy 17:18-20, the king must write out the law and keep it with him so that his heart may not be lifted up above his brothers. So the ruler is under law, God's law. Micah 6:8, he has shown you, O man, what is good, to do justice and to love mercy. Male authority is therefore always contingent. It is never self-justifying. Men are not told to enforce themselves. They are told to submit to justice, mercy, and God. This is why later patriarchal systems that treated men as near sovereigns in the home or church were never fully faithful to the biblical structure. They replaced God-centered authority with male-centered control. Sounds like friggin', like, and again, I mean this respectfully, sounds a little bit like Matt Walsh and Steven Crowder and Nick Fuentes and Tate, even though he's a Muslim now. But again, it's good. Like, you can marry multiple women, have multiple wives, etc. Like, this is, again, subjugation of women. And I think Andrew Tate, again, is like he's right on a lot of things, but no. The passage most often weaponized against Christians, I already talked about that. Let a woman learn in quietness and full submission. I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man. Again, this is Timothy. This is not even God or Jesus saying this, but to full submission to God. Passage was often taken to mean women are intellectually unfit. Women may never teach. Women are naturally deceptive. Women are permanently barred from leadership. But the reading creates serious problems I already talked about. In the ancient world, that is already significant. He is not saying women must never study theology. He is saying women are to be taught in a disciplined way. I don't disagree with that at all. And so I do think that women should be absolutely taught in a disciplined way. And, you know, and in a way where we're not like allowing our emotions to take over rationality and decision-making and stuff like that as well. And the social justice warriors, I'm coming to mind. And yeah, we're like the education system now, Carleton University, it's so friggin' left-wing radical, pseudoscientific, it blows my friggin' mind. So I went for my for a second degree. This was in cognitive science, but I took a lot of electives with like from other science programs, and just to see like where I wanted to like fit, you know, like what I was more interested in. And it was in my fourth year, and I had to stop because I there was so much going on anyways during that period, but also like just the professors. I wasn't able to go to campus because I wasn't vaccinated, to have discussions with the professors or the heads of departments to question what they were teaching, and just nonsensical. And these were science programs. And again, just being gaslit, being ghosted, or even what was it? Like even giving them information on COVID. I had a wellness check call, and like I was so infuriated by that. I'm like, did you even read the email? No. Okay. So maybe you want to take a look at the email before you give me a goddamn welfare check over COVID, when I'm giving scientific, government, and medical data to your COVID team. You're friggin' like your Gestapo Nazi types that won't even let me enter the campus, even though I'm paying the same amount of money for my friggin' program as people that are allowed on the. Oh my God. Anyways, I'm on a tangent. But again, there are absolutely people like, and again, and I will say these were women professors that are literally teaching the pseudoscience, anti-society bullshit propaganda I've ever heard in my friggin' life. And they should be fired. They should be fired. Or again, disciplined education, re-education. They're talking about Jordan Peterson re-education. No. Carleton University professors, Ottawa University professors, Toronto University professors, and heads of department, and curriculum change. Okay, first Paul says, let a woman learn. Okay, so I'm being redundant here. So the Bible elsewhere shows women teaching and leading. Okay, so a universal ban would contradict Deborah, Huldah, Priscilla, Phoebe, Junia, Mary Magdalene, Jael, Miriam, countless others. So, yeah. So the most coherent reading is that this passage is a warning against a certain type of false or improper teaching. Totally understand that. Not a ban on all female instruction forever. Okay, so why this can be understood as a warning about deception, not womanhood itself. Every society has examples of people who, through deception, charisma, ideology, or instability, mislead others. A warning against certain deceived teachers does not erase the legitimacy of all women any more than warnings against false male teachers erase all male teachings. Because there's a lot more teachings in the Bible about like not believing in the false prophets and the like the teachers and the leaders anyways, the ones that Jesus spoke against. Okay, so the New Testament itself repeatedly warns against false apostles, false prophets, deceivers, wolves in sheep's clothing. Okay, so these warnings do not abolish leadership either, they regulate it. So the issue is more plausibly disorder, deception, improper, or domineering teaching, a temporary corrective to a real danger, not a metaphysical statement that women are spiritually second class. And so, yeah. Women should remain silent in the churches. But this cannot mean women may never speak in church, because earlier in the same letter, Paul refers to women. Okay, so women were clearly speaking in worship. So this means chapter 14 must possibly be dealing with disruptive speech, not female speech as such. Paul also tells tongue speakers and prophets to be silent in certain conditions. So, like AOC, oh no, it was Ilhan Omar, but AOC as well. Like these freaking clowns are like possibly who Timothy was warning us against. But when Trump was talking, and again, I don't agree with a lot of what Trump is doing or saying, but there's a lot of good that's also happening. So it's just really confusing. But anyway, shooting her mouth off when he was having his State of the Union address, and she was just saying some bullshit. So and she's an elected official, again, fraud, married her friggin' brother in order to like get him a green card. Like, she needs to be deported already. And again, these are the people, like I am totally in agreement that that the Bible was warning us of: AOC and friggin' Ilhan Omar. Jesus repeatedly undermines patriarchal treatment of women. So I've talked about this before. Mary of Bethany, disciple, not just domestic worker. So Mary sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Jesus defends her against the assumption that a woman belongs only in service. So I'm just going to see here. It's so far away from me. Just logging into my Gematrinator, because I'm also obsessed with Gematria, but like Bible verses. No, I don't want to log out. God damn it. Okay, so I'm just going to see. Here's a freaking mess. Okay. Luke 10:39. Okay, I'm logging in. And then I'll pull it up. Okay. Okay, here's the Luke 10:39. And she had a sister called Mary, which also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. So I just want to see what 10:38 says. Okay, so now it came to pass as they went that he entered into a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha received him into her house. Okay, yeah, so it was the Martha story. It's so hard to like memorize passages in the Bible because there's so much and different interpretations and different translations. Okay, and she had a sister called Mary who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was cumbered about much serving and came to him and said, Lord, dost thou not care that my sister hath left me to serve alone? Bid her therefore that she help me. And Jesus answered and said unto her, Martha, Martha, thou art careful and troubled about many things, but one thing is needful, and Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. Mary hath chosen that good part, which shall not be taken away from her. But one thing is needful. Okay, so again, it's not taken away from Martha, and like the sacrifices that she's making, but the teachings that he was giving Mary at his feet, again, equally important. So Jesus defends her against the assumption that a woman belongs only in service in that way, right? Because again, women that are teaching, educators, nurses, things like that. Again, these are so. Anyway, Samaritan women, theological interlocutor and witness. In John 4, Jesus speaks at length with a woman across social, religious, and ethnic boundaries, then uses her testimony to reach others. Let him who is without sin cast the first stone. That was John 8:7 regarding women accused of adultery. Jesus confronts male legal hypocrisy. Mary Magdalene entrusted with the resurrection announcement. In John 20, woman is the first commissioned witness of Christianity's central event. So even biblical texts being codified into law, like we have witnesses when people go to court, etc. And the first witness that Jesus had for his resurrection was a woman. And so for people to say that women, our roles are only in the kitchen. And then when I hear women saying it, Christian women as well, I'm like, oh my God, you are definitely misinterpreting the freaking Bible, or you're getting your Bible studies from the man of the house, and you're not looking at it yourself, and you're not interpreting and reading the Bible yourself. Okay, so women patrons, not accessories, but supporters of the mission. Okay, so in Luke 8:1-3, women financed the movement. I've talked about that before as well. Mary Magdalene and other women financed Jesus' movement and the missions and the places that they would go and travel to heal and teach other people. Jesus consistently treats women as learners, witnesses, bearers of truth, recipients of dignity, public participants in God's work. Any interpretation of Paul that turns women into voiceless inferiors is therefore out of harmony with the way Jesus himself acted. Okay, so isolating verses from context, quoting, wives submit, women be silent, I do not permit a woman, ignoring submit to one another, the husband does not have authority over his own body, women praying and prophesying, women teaching and leading elsewhere. Turning order into inferiority. Instruction about order or correction became claims that women are naturally lesser, which the Bible does not teach. Then there's love and respect. So now I asked about George Orwell. Okay, so Orwell was warning that totalitarian systems manipulate sex, desire, motherhood, marriage, and women's bodies in order to control society, and men as well. The party uses women as instruments of ideological policing. So in 1984, George Orwell, Julia at first glance, the broader figure of the anti-sex league women. Winston initially sees women associated with. I'm giving examples and parallels of how warnings from George Orwell parallel the warnings from the Bible, or the teachings of the Bible, and purity campaigns, suspicion, surveillance, ideological zeal. The party wants women to become reproducers, informants, moral enforcers, and bodies without desire. In that sense, Orwell is showing how authoritarian systems often recruit women into the machinery of repression by turning them into guardians of orthodoxy. It is not women are in danger, or are the danger rather, it's the regime weaponizes women just as it weaponizes men. Sexual repression and political repression. In 1984, Orwell makes a major point that sexual frustration and emotional starvation make people easier to control. The party wants no private loyalty, no real marriage, no erotic joy, no family bond stronger than loyalty to Big Brother. Women are central to this in the book because the regime treats female sexuality as something to be sterilized politically, redirected into duty, stripped of freedom. So Orwell's warning is not against women, it is against a state that turns women into reproductive political tools or sterilized political tools. Wherever the money. So Julia is not the feminist ideal, but she is anti-totalitarian in one key sense. Julia is important because she rebels through desire, secrecy, bodily autonomy, and refusal of ideological purity. She's not presented as a philosopher or political theorist like Winston wants her to be, but Orwell uses her to show that ordinary human appetite itself becomes rebellion under totalitarianism. In that sense, Julia represents female defiance, embodied resistance, refusal to let the state colonize the private self. Orwell also shows how the party destroys motherhood and family. The party attacks one of the oldest human structures: mother-child bond, husband-wife intimacy, family loyalty. Children become spies, marriage becomes sterile, women become functional rather than relational. That is one of Orwell's deepest warnings. A regime that conquers the family and sex has conquered the inner life. And I talked about this before about transformations within oneself. That's good for the individual and the collective. And when we have, because everyone experiences varying degrees of trauma. And when it's sacrificial or voluntary trauma or sacrifice for the betterment of ourselves and humanity collectively, sacrifice, then that's when it's transformative, where it becomes more traumatic, and is when it is not agreed upon. It's not self-sacrifice. It's something that was done onto someone without consent. And same thing with relationships, like the consent, like mutual consent in relationships and respect. Same thing applies to society. If you want the darker reading, Orwell feared mass conformity, including female conformity. There's also a harder edge in Orwell. He distrusted mass emotional conformity, slogans, and herd psychology. In the novel, some female figures are shown participating in ideological enthusiasm, but so are the men. Okay, so to make it a more correct statement, Orwell warned that totalitarian systems often exploit women's social roles, especially around sex, purity, motherhood, and moral enforcement, to stabilize control. His concern was not that women are inherently deceptive, but that regimes manipulate both men and women by corrupting natural bonds and turning persons into instruments of ideology. Okay, so both Orwell and certain New Testament warning passages recognize that ideology can spread through corrupted teachings and false moral performance. The issue is not womanhood itself, but deception, manipulation, and the capture of persons by false systems. That keeps the argument focused on false teaching, propaganda, corruption of truth, social control, rather than making women as the problem. So I kind of like that. So Orwell's warning is not that women are inherently deceptive, but that authoritarian systems weaponize both men and women by destroying truth, intimacy, and personhood. Okay, so the Bible and George Orwell both warn about what happens when truth, conscience, love, and the human person are crushed by power. Orwell warned politically about totalitarianism. Jesus warns spiritually and morally about domination, deception, hypocrisy, and the destruction of the soul. Where they strongly parallel each other. War on truth. In 1984, the party destroys truth. Yep. Language is corrupted. Memory is rewritten. We're seeing that in Canada. Like the playbook on how to do this can be more obvious. So lies become public reality. And again, no one is being held accountable. And this is government, that it should be government led. So Jesus also warns constantly about falsehood, deception, hypocrisy, people calling evil good and good evil in practice. He presents truth as something liberating, not something rulers get to manufacture. So John 8:32, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Power without moral limits. Orwell's party wants power for its own sake. It does not govern to serve, it governs to dominate. Jesus directly confronts this model of rule. Matthew 20:25 through 26, the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them. It shall not be so among you. This is one of the clearest anti-totalitarian statements in the New Testament. Jesus rejects domination as the proper model for human order. Destruction of the inner person. In 1984, the regime is not satisfied with outward obedience. That doesn't care anymore about the outward. It's about the internal control. Your mind, your loyalty, our speech, our desires, our memory. It wants to remake the person from the inside. Jesus also focuses on the inner person, the heart, the conscience, integrity, what a person loves, what they worship. He warns that gaining the world while losing the soul is a catastrophe. Mark 8:36. What shall it profit a man if he shall gain the whole world and lose his own soul? So these people that are you're saying like, oh, they're rich and they're famous and blah blah blah, and they're deceiving us and taking over us, and how are we letting this happen? It's because what they're doing is completely anti-God and anti-Christianity. And a good and real Christian would actually never stoop to those levels in order to get that much power and control and deceive people, which is why I keep on reiterating the Christian God should have never been removed from the curriculum. One of our friggin' first mistakes, and causing like more of the societal decay that we see. Corruption of language. Orwell's Newspeak is a tool for shrinking thought. We've got the CBC, CNN, Global News, Bell Media, left and right. Jesus also condemns corrupt speech, false appearances, and manipulative religious language. He repeatedly attacks hypocrisy, saying one thing outwardly while being rotten inwardly. The warning is similar. Yeah, Bill Gates, Fauci, these guys, like, yeah. Going to hell. Or living a hell. Attack on love, family, and natural bonds. In 1984, the state tries to destroy marriage, sexuality, parent-child loyalty, private affection, because those bonds compete with total power. Okay, so a little bit of redundancy here. Almost done. So Orwell diagnosis is political and civilizational. Enemy is totalitarian power. Focus is propaganda, surveillance, state control. CBDCs, biodigital convergence, propaganda. Again, this is all stuff, unfortunately, that the public we are funding now, including, unfortunately, our special forces getting exposed a few years ago for psychological operations that it imposed on us during COVID. I don't like saying that because, again, I'm someone I love Canada. I'm loyal to Canada. I at one point respected and still do to varying degrees the military, our Canadian Armed Forces, and law enforcement. But it's dwindling. The more and more myself and others who have served in varying capacities are seeing just how destructive it has gotten, especially in the last 10 years, and how incompetence is being rewarded and promoted into positions that they don't even deserve. And anyway, so Jesus' diagnosis is deeper than politics. Enemy includes sin, false worship, pride, and we have Pride Month. Anyway, hypocrisy, domination, spiritual blindness. Focus is not only saving society, but saving the human being before God. So Orwell is warning about the outer machinery of enslavement. Jesus is warning about both the outer machinery and the inner corruption that makes people build and accept it. Okay, so yes, 1984 can be read as a secular mirror of dangers Jesus was also trying to save humanity from. Lies replacing truth, power replacing love, fear replacing conscience, control replacing freedom, the state of or system replacing God. Okay, so George Orwell, secular political. Anyway, Big Brother and the biblical problem of false lordship. A little redundancy here. Okay, so Exodus and Pharaoh. Pharaoh is not only a political tyrant, he's the ruler who refuses God, hardens himself against truth, and treats human beings as labor units. He's a prototype of the total state power without mercy, economy, without dignity, order, without justice. Daniel and imperial worship. In Daniel, kings demand worship, image veneration, and total loyalty. The issue is not simply political allegiance, but who gets ultimate obedience. We're seeing that in communist countries and Kim Jong-un, and the portraits that have to be like in everywhere, in schools and homes, billboards. Complete false reality. It was what they're being taught in school as well, those who actually do go to school. So Revelations and the beast system in Revelation is the clearest biblical parallel to totalitarianism. Controls buying and selling, demands allegiance, punishes dissent, fuses political, economic, and symbolic power. Big Brother is not identical to the beast, but he functions in a similar literary way, a symbol of power that wants to occupy the place of God. Yeah, Jesus directly opposes domination as the proper model of rule, whether it be in a home, whether it be in a leadership position throughout society. I'm trying to get out a lot of the redundancy in here. Yeah. The Pharisees' hypocrisy and managed reality. Outward language pious, inward reality corrupt. Public performance replaces truth. Moral authority becomes theatrical control. All right. Rome and the machinery of empire. The Roman Empire is also an important comparison point. Rome claimed order, peace, universal rule, legitimacy, sacred authority, but it often secured those things through violence, occupation, hierarchy, humiliation, spectacle. Orwell's totalitarian state is more technologically invasive than Rome, but the basic pattern is similar. Empire presents itself as the guarantor of civilization while requiring submission to a system above truth and personhood. Talks about false prophets. Okay, in biblical thought, false prophets are dangerous because they do not merely say false things, they make lies morally comforting. Not familiar? They tell people, Mark Carney has been doing that a lot, even in his book, and anyway. Peace where there is no peace, safety where there is corruption, righteousness where there is a rot. That is very close to Orwell's concern with ideology. Party slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Function like false prophecy, they reverse reality and demand belief. Yeah, calling evil good, flattering power, normalizing falsehood. Literally seeing, again, so much ongoing in the last few years. Punishing those who speak truth. Party attacks marriage, erotic intimacy, private friendship, parent-child trust, memory of self. Anyway, yeah. Okay. The Antichrist structure without sensationalism. In the New Testament, Antichrist language points to denial of truth, substitution of false lordship, deception, spiritual rebellion, counterfeit authority. By that standard, Orwell's party is Antichrist-like in structure because it replaces truth with manufactured reality, replaces conscience with obedience, replaces love with fear, replaces God with state, replaces memory with propaganda. Yeah, fake history. Such fake history with Canada, with what this government and the education systems are spewing the media. Okay, I don't want to get too okay, so that's it. All right, just some interesting things out of the Bible. And yeah, I don't think there's like a lot more I can add. So on that note, I will leave it at that. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful rest of your day.